Pope Francis lost his temper over a woman converting souls to Christ, and he's still mad. Joining us now, Church Militant Rome correspondent Dr. Jules Gomez. Jules, what's bugging Francis?
Brad, Francis met with members of the Barnabite order yesterday, priests, nuns, and lay members of this very old order. And there, very oddly, he talked about how he had lost his temper with a woman who came to him and told him how she converted two people to the Catholic faith.
Tell us more about how Francis recounted that particular incident.
Well, let me quote his exact words, Brad. This is what he told this audience. He said, "I had a bad experience in a youth meeting some years ago. I was coming out of the sacristy and there was a lady, very elegant. You could also see that she was very rich, with a boy and a girl. And this lady, who spoke Spanish, says to me, 'Father, I'm happy because I converted these two. One is from such a place and this one is from another place.' Pope Francis then goes on to say, 'I got angry, and I said, you didn't convert anything. You disrespected these people. You didn't accompany them. You proselytized, and that's not evangelizing.' Pope Francis then tells the Barnabite congregation yesterday, he says, 'She was proud for converting. Be careful to make a clear distinction between apostolic action and proselytizing. We do not proselytize. The Lord never proselytized.' This is what Francis said yesterday.
So first of all, Jules, going back there, now this is recounted yesterday by Pope Francis, but the incident itself probably dated back years, maybe even to when Francis himself was just a priest?
Absolutely. It's very clear from his exchange that this took place when Francis was a priest in Buenos Aires.
Wow, so he's had a problem with this for many, many years. Does Pope Francis ever define what he means by proselytizing versus just helping souls, come to the light of the truth and praying for grace and converting like we all must do and continually do in our lives to Christ's edicts and into his Catholic Church? Does he ever define that?
Brad, funnily enough, I wrote a column on this topic 2 years ago for Church Militant. I think we called it Proselytism, Pope Francis's Pet Phantom. And there I gave a number of instances about how Francis had railed against proselytizing, talked about evangelizing, but never, ever made a distinction between the two. He did so briefly to Jesuits once, but it was very, very vague. So, for example, in 2016, he told a group of Lutherans and Catholics that proselytizing is a sin. He then went on to talk about how proselytizing is the strongest poison against the ecumenical path. You must give testimony of your Christian life, but without wanting to convince. I mean, we evangelize or proselytize, whatever word you want to use, to persuade people, which is a term used so often, referring to St. Paul's own evangelization in the Acts of the Apostles. He then told his good friend, God rest his soul, who is no more, the Italian journalist, atheist journalist Eugenio Scalfari, he said, proselytism is a solemn nonsense. It makes no sense. Well, Francis even berated the hapless children in one of Rome's schools. He told them, you can't tell Jewish and Muslim children, come and be converted. We are not in the times of the Crusades. But Brad, he's never, ever made a distinction between the two. And he's never, ever told Catholics to go out and convert people to the faith of the apostles.
Well, if you talk about proselytizing as stiff-arming someone or using penal laws or like the Islam, conversion by the sword type of thing, I could understand that. But just presenting the truth of the Catholic faith and praying for people, and that persuades them itself to accept, to truly convert, not be coerced into the church. I have a hard time understanding where he's coming from, but let's pull off for a second. Jules, you have a story very near and dear to your heart. Recount for our viewers a related incident of all this that went on between Pope Francis and a former Anglican bishop.
Well, we know that this very famous and very erudite bishop, the Bishop of Rochester, a former Anglican, Bishop Michael Nazir Ali, who is a renowned Islamic scholar, he converted to the Catholic faith fairly recently. And Bishop Michael Nazir Ali was on the Anglican Roman Catholic International Committee for, dialogue, ARCIC, and produced many of their documents, co-produced many of their documents. And when he went and met Pope Francis and said he intends to convert to Catholicism, Pope Francis point blank told him, stay Anglican, remain in the Church of England, don't become Catholic. Bishop Michael Nazir Ali did not listen to Pope Francis. He did convert, and he's now Monsignor Michael Nazir Ali.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, well, how is the Italian media connecting the dots on the Pope's latest remarks here? What do they see in all this?
Well, the Italian media is having a great time emphasizing how Francis loses his temper. And they're talking about how he lost his temper with a Chinese lady and slapped her hand some time ago. You can see the video there. She was tugging at his hand quite affectionately, and he slapped her hand. That became international news. He apologized the next day for doing that, and he said, I do lose my temper sometimes. But he also lost his temper in Mexico. I think it was in 2016 when he was, bending over somebody's wheelchair. And again, more recently, when a woman asked him to bless her dog, he lost his temper and said, people should be having more children, not dogs and cats. So Francis is really known for losing his temper, and people who live with him in Casa Santa Marta tell me that he not only loses his temper, but occasionally flies into outbursts where he uses language that would make a sailor blush.
I know about that, the poor lady, the Chinese lady there that got her hand slapped. She was pleading for the Pope to do something about those who were being persecuted for being Catholic in China, and other Christians there being persecuted as well. Well, before leaving this planet, Jules, Christ's final marching orders to the apostles, including St. Peter, the first head of the church, was to baptize and teach all nations to observe whatsoever I have commanded. And that was at the end of Matthew's gospel. Then at the end of Mark's gospel, he adds, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believes not shall be condemned. Seems like converting souls, Jules, to accept the church that Christ himself established is kind of essential to this Great Commission.
Well, Brad, if you go to the Jesuit Generalate in Rome, you will see a huge statue of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and below the statue are very beautiful words in Latin. In the English translation says, "Go forth and ignite the world." Now, next to that statue is a red fire extinguisher. And when Pope John Paul II visited the Jesuit Generalate in 1983, he wryly remarked on the apt juxtaposition. St. Ignatius saying, "Go forth and ignite the world," and the Jesuits now having a red fire extinguisher trying to douse the flames of whoever seeks to go forth and ignite the world with the gospel. And remember, Francis is the archetypal Jesuit. Brad.
Wow, I think you really hit something there, Jules. That's quite the insight from the great John Paul II. Jules, thank you very much for reporting on all this with such great, clear context.
Thank you, Brad.